Thank you all for tuning in. My name is Laila Jefferson, and I'm a senior nursing student that will be graduating in December, which is so soon. Yay, so excited. Today I'm going to share with you my research, the retention of nursing student self-efficacy from the simulation laboratory to an authentic clinical experience. The reason why I picked this topic is because of the concerns I heard from my fellow students. Some of my fellow students would express their feelings about simulation lab and say they didn't feel it was very helpful. A lot of them felt that simulation did not prepare them for clinical. So I wanted to see if simulation was really beneficial to students in clinical. So I decided to study self-efficacy. I chose self-efficacy because the definition focuses on the capability to form an action, which is what I wanted to study. So for my study, self-efficacy is defined as the belief someone holds in their own capability to perform actions to accomplish a goal. For this study, simulation is defined as repeated practice in a psychological safe environment where students can participate in hands-on and receive feedback. According to literature, simulation increases nursing students' self-efficacy. Let's take a closer look at literature. The possession of self-efficacy can influence performance quality and quantity of effort, as well as the willingness to overcome obstacles or difficult tasks. Nurses with high self-efficacy accomplish this by overcoming stressful situations more easily due to the high self-confidence and past experience of a successful task performance. Simulation-based training increases self-efficacy compared with traditional didactic lecture. Simulation training serves as a valuable tool for developing and increasing nursing students' self-efficacy of aspects of clinical practice. Simulations before and during nursing students' initial clinical practice rotation serves as a useful and effective learning strategy and increases self-efficacy. Studies illustrate simulation develops self-efficacy. Whether the self-efficacy is retained with performance of the same skill in an authentic clinical setting has not yet been measured. Questions remain about simulation and the retention of self-efficacy through an first authentic clinical experience. How time and additional simulation practice and the authentic experience may affect the developed self-efficacy is unknown. So my research, the purpose of my research was to study and measure the retention of self-efficacy gained from a simulation experience through an authentic clinical experience. My research questions are as follows. Number 1 is the self-efficacy gained following simulation retained through the first authentic experience? How does time influence the retention of self-efficacy for an authentic clinical experience? And how does additional hands-on practice or exposure with this skill influence retention of self-efficacy? And for my study, I use Kolb's experiential learning theory as the framework for my study. The first part of the learning theory is called concrete learning. And in this stage, the learner is actually doing the task he or she is trying to perform instead of just reading about it in literature or textbooks. This is actually the hands-on practice part of learning. And for my study, that was simulation practice and skills checkoff. And I'll explain checkoff later during my presentation. The second stage is reflective observation. And this is taking time away from the concrete experience and reviewing what has experienced through communication. So this is the post-simulation debriefing, the skills checkoff, and simulation practice. The third stage is forming an abstract conceptual. In this stage, the learner tries to make sense of what is happening, interprets the events, and gains understanding of the relationship between them. And this is done in my study in the preparation of clinical, during clinical, so we call that clinical prep, and additional simulation practice. The final stage is active experimentation. And this is when the individual applies what they learned in the experience to another situation. So for my study, the study is self-efficacy during the final stage of COPE learning cycle, active experimentation. So for my methods, I wanted to use the Adult Health 1 students. And the reason why I picked the Adult Health 1 students is because they learn how to administer intravenous piggyback medications, also called IV piggyback, in simulation lab, and are expected to administer these types of medication in the clinical setting. So I am measuring the student's self-efficacy related to the performance of IV piggyback medication administration. So what I did is I visited the Adult Health 1 class and invited the students to participate in my study. I obtained informed consent from 43 students. So the students participated in simulation practice lab of administration of IV piggyback medication. Then they had 1 week to study and become proficient before completing the competency evaluation, and that is the skills checkoff I told you about earlier. So after the skills checkoff, the participants completed a demographic form and a general self-efficacy survey, which has been shown to have validity and reliability. After they filled out the survey, they entered their 6 weeks clinical rotation, and the students were instructed to complete a GSE survey after administering the IV piggyback medication in a clinical setting. At the end, I surveyed all the students to see if any of them participated in additional simulation practice. And this is what I found. This is my demographic sheet. As you can see, the majority of my students were female, young, and Caucasian. A low percentage of them had any experience in healthcare, experience with medication administration, or IV piggyback medication administration. These are the results I collected here. After simulation, 43 students filled out a survey and their mean GSE score was 32.6. 2 weeks after simulation, 6 students administered IV piggyback medication in clinical, and then they filled out their survey, and this was their mean score. 4 weeks later, 3 students had administered IV piggyback medication in clinical, and their mean GSE score was 32. And 6 weeks following, 5 students administered IV piggyback medication in clinical, and their mean GSE score was 32.6. All of these GSE mean scores equal a moderate level. All my data collected was inputted into SPSS software, and I used a Wilcoxon rank test correlation to get P scores and Z scores. I used the Wilcoxon rank test because it is the most effective used to show correlation between low subject numbers. And as you can see from my results of my Z-scores and P-scores, there was no statistical significant change in the student self-efficacy score for clinical for any time frame. So all this data, I took all the data and results and I answered my research questions. The student's self-efficacy was gained from IV piggyback medication administration following simulation experience was retained through the student's first authentic clinical experience. And my results, you can see with some literature, I was able to back up how my results could be supported. I found that one research study showed that while clinical settings may increase their confidence in their ability to use skills. My second research question was around time, and I found that time did not significantly influence student self-efficacy, but time did cause some fluctuations in the total GSE scores at the end of the time variable. So 2 weeks post-simulation, the GSE scores actually did increase. And then 4 weeks post-simulation, there was a decrease. Unfortunately, I was not able to answer my third research question, which was about additional simulation practice, because no students reported any additional simulation practice. The limitation of my study, I kind of mentioned before, small sample of young Caucasian females. My additional simulation practice was actually self-reported by the subjects. And another limitation was not every student enrolled in the study was provided the opportunity to administer an IV piggyback medication. So for my study, due to all my findings, I do recommend, because of the slight decrease in self-efficacy at 4 weeks post-simulation, it may be beneficial to add additional simulation practice between the 2 and 4 weeks post-simulation, because 2 weeks post-simulation, there's that slight increase, and then 4 weeks was that decrease. So I'm saying if you add additional simulation between that time frame of the 2 weeks and 4 weeks, the self-efficacy scores could actually continue to increase instead of get that decrease. For future studies, I recommend a larger and diverse population because, of course, not everyone learns the same. Also, for future studies, it would be great to if all the subjects could have the opportunity to administer IV piggyback medication administration in clinical. The finding of my study illustrates that nursing students' self-efficacy gain after simulation is retained through an authentic clinical rotation. The sooner the authentic clinical experience occurs after the simulation practice, the greater the cumulative effect of the simulation and clinical experiences can positively have on self-efficacy. So I want to thank you all for tuning in and for your attention. That concludes my study.